So guys, this morning I headed over to Screen Rant, and last day published, this is the greatest Star Trek show of all time. No debate in the history of science fiction has been as fierce as Star Trek's the original series versus the Next Generation argument. Fans spend decades analyzing, comparing, and championing each site, but when it comes to deciding the best Star Trek show, it's a battle of icons. Both are cultural milestones, but only one can truly claim the throne. Written by Tom Russell, he says, fans have spent decades analyzing, comparing. I've spent decades watching them and enjoying both. So that's the crux of it. It boils down to not what's the greatest Star Trek TV show the way I look at it. It's what you like better or best. What do you think, right, is the greatest Star Trek TV show? To definitively, right, proclaim, to, without any reservation or doubt or challenge, to proclaim something is the greatest by opinion, it's kind of ballsy. And it's certainly not supportive because it's just an opinion, right? But let's play around with it. Say there's other metrics. Of course there are. You could say there are financial, profit, sure. Now you look, they're both profitable entities, both coming from the original Gene Roddenberry Star Trek, right? Where it all started, the map, the blueprint. So Next Generation came along and there's profits for both and we can separate them. Now I'm coming from it, first and foremost, to get this out of the way. As a Star Trek fan from back in the day, the original series I grew up with it, and then Next Generation came around and I loved that. And from an original series fan to a Next Generation fan, I became then a Next Generation writer. I wrote for Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. I wrote episodes of Next Gen and of DS9. So I look at it as a fan and then later as a contributor, as a freelance writer to both shows. Then I pitched to Voyager extensively. But I'll always be a fan first and foremost. So for me, it's not about the greatest Star Trek TV show. It's about the love of the franchise, the epic journey, the epic that is Star Trek. And I think that's, again, the core and the crux of this. I can say that I like, for example, last weekend was that great Alvarez-Crawford fight on Netflix. One of the biggest boxing matches in history. Dana White produced it, all these stars. I'm so proud of my buddy. He was there as a personal bodyguard to one of the biggest stars in the world. We were thrilled. But I'm saying, Alvarez and Crawford. Now, Crawford won the fight. So you can say, well, I like Alvarez as a fighter better. Maybe you like his style more, his personality. They're both fighters. But Crawford won. He won the purse. He arguably is the better fighter. That is a metric you can sink your teeth into and you can prove. But what's better or the greatest, the original series or Next Generation? How do you prove that? Now, if you want to go by profit, the original series in ways is probably more profitable. Well, by a cinematic reason, right? Feature films. The original series with Kirk and Spock, 6 standalone feature films, and then a crossover with the Next Gen crew with Generations in 1994. The other films, the first classic 6, I think made about $750 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's probably well over $1 billion. So in terms of box office or profit motive, that is considerably more than Next Generation. Next Generation had 3 standalone films, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis. And they did well, but feature films of the original series eclipses it. So by that metric, then the original series is the greatest TV show and or feature film franchise, right? So you can go back and forth. Next Generation had more seasons, and arguably it made more, of course, advertising dollars in that way on TV broadcast and that now in streaming. Okay. So we can keep playing the game, but when all is said and done, it's your opinion, right? Now, I'm the least biblical person in the world. I'm not religious. I respect religion, but what I'm saying is I look at the Bible. There's the Old Testament and the New Testament. And yeah, that's where I'm going. The original series can be looked upon as the Bible or the Old Testament. Next Generation is the New Testament. Star Trek, the New Generation, the New Testament. Okay. So you can look at it in other books, say Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. You had first The Hobbit as sort of the original, the Old Testament, the the blueprint, the star map or the fantasy map, and then you have Lord of the Rings, Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King as the new generation, the next generation. But they're both inclusive. They're one large epic journey in fantasy, like Star Trek. You know, we can make many, many arguments about this. So when all is said and done, I think if you're like me, I love both. I don't play this game of what's better. Look, I made a lot of great money and profit by writing for Next Gen and Deep Space Nine. You could argue that, Will should like them more, the Next Gen era more. But when I watch the original series yet, or one of the feature films, I'm still giddy like I was a kid watching it back in the day. I started watching Star Trek when I was 4 years old. I know it was before grammar school, so you start around five, usually kindergarten. And I was watching it before I was in grade school. I know that. So that's how long I've been watching the original series. And then later, when I was just entering college, I wrote for Next Gen and Deep Space Nine. So, I could be biased or say, well, they're the greatest because I made nice profits, some nice checks. I started my writing career, but I love both. I don't play the game. I'll watch, say, Relics with Jimmy Doohan as Scotty. I'll watch Unification with Leonard Nimoy as Spock, and these are Next Gen episodes. And I'll watch the Star Trek episodes, the Mark Leonard. It's connected. These TV shows, to me, are one big tapestry and one big journey that we're still on, even though people could talk about, I call it PP Trek, New Trek. I mean, that's sort of separate in ways. But even say Voyager and Enterprise, there's a place for all this new stuff, but it'll always be sort of the original series, the Next Generation, the Old Testament, and the New Testament. You can't take a Bible and split it in half, right? You can't carve a Bible up. You love both, and they're both required and needed and necessary. So what do you think? Give us your feedback. Give us your thoughts. What's the greatest for you? Or are you like me? I want both. I love both, and I gotta have both. Hope you're enjoying. Hope you're subscribing. See you soon.